So good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure to have you here. I'm Deborah Ultan, the Arts and Performing Arts Librarian, Curator, and Archivist for the University of Minnesota Libraries. I have been here since 2000, developing the arts research collections, and over the years have curated up to 50 shows throughout the libraries and with our special collections and archives. In the fall of 2018, for the libraries, I was able to acquire the complete 21st editions collection and secure our role as the repository for the entirety of the 21st editions archive. The 21st editions collection and archive resides within the larger special collection, the Francis V. Gorman Rare Art Books, Media, and Artists Archives. Concurrent with the university's acquisition, the National Gallery of Art also acquired the complete 21st editions collection. The university's collection stands as the study collection to encourage engaged, hands-on research. Classes are coming regularly to learn about the art of the book and why such a trade is so significant and meaningful. They see how artists' inspirations, visions, responses to the world and life stories can be expressed, reinvigorated in the form of a book. An artist book that may be likened to architecture or theater, where engineering combines with an aesthetic concept or a script becomes an animated production. Researchers are regularly seeking out the collection since we got it and visiting to study the printing techniques, the papers and bindings, if not the photography, imagery, text, and poetry. Today, we have the honor to speak with 21st Editions co-founder Stephen Albahari, his production and office manager, Pam Clark, and longtime collaborators, graphic designer Crissy Welzen, and educator, poet, photographer John Mettoyer. With the exhibition celebrating 25 years of photography and artist books, and this panel, my goal is to enlighten you, the community, to the value of this collection and archive and the depth of intellectual prowess and refined artistry. Let's give a hand to our panelists who have taken the time to come from all over the country to Minnesota and the university for this special occasion.
Thank you.
Before we jump into questions and dialogue, I'd like to note that every book created by 21st Editions has a compelling story, and we will get to hear about some of those. Stephen's own story, though, behind how 21st Editions came to be is a compelling story in and of itself. By dropping in some of the archives into the exhibition downstairs, you can see where things are started and how they evolved, the dreams and ideas that were discussed early on. And an example of the prototype books that Stephen did of Edward Curtis's photography and with the photos of Olivia Parker. Stephen, you're not sleeping over there, are you?
No.
Will you start us off with your background?
Sure.
And how you and Janet, your wife, turned your garage into workspace and even mortgaged your house to finance this venture?
3 times. Truly. Thank you. Well, I think at the root of it, I was a visual artist. I went to college actually studying music, and a year and a half into it, I had been studying music for 10 years, a year and a half into it or so, I picked up a camera in one of my summer midterms, and I just knew right away that that was it, because with music, I had many friends that were already in the city playing out of college, and they were far much better than I was, and they were starving. So I figured, you know, maybe that's not the best way to go. So I took a turn into visual arts and theatrical lighting, and then went on to graduate school to do film in cinema verite with Ricky Leacock, who was one of the founders of cinema verite, fathers. And I went to school in Bennington and in Cambridge, and then moved back to Bennington to start a company with a friend of mine. We were manufacturing. Now, the reason I tell you these early things is because you'll see that all of my experiences in work and in school kind of was an aggregate that led me to publishing. Everything related to it. I couldn't see it at the time. I was just following whatever wherever my passion took me. So we decided to leave Vermont. I was probably with my wife to be, Janet, for a couple of years. And while we were in our late 20s, it was still long, cold winters. We weren't skiing as much. So we figured, well, where do we want to settle? And I grew up on Cape Cod, and Janet spent her summers there. So one summer we were vacationing, and we were just going over the bridge, and she was back in school again, and I really was trying to figure out what to do. I just turned to her on the bridge. I said, let's move to Brewster, Massachusetts. She goes, okay. So 6 months later, we were there. And then a few years later, I started to get the idea again that I'd like to create a journal of contemporary photography on the heels of Alfred Stieglitz, because nothing like camera work had been done since, when did he finish? 1917. And I had been reading photography criticism. I worked for the grandfather of photography criticism in college, A.D. Coleman. And what we were reading was being brought in from the same three critics for 20 years. Like, we need different perspectives on photography. So let's bring in, let's have what if we brought in writers that never wrote on photography before, but were top educators and academics in their discipline. So that's what we did. I found John Wood, who was a great two-time Iowa Poetry Prize winner, I think only two-time winner ever. His close friends were people like Allen Ginsberg. He was a dual scholar from McNeese State University, from where John Wood and John Mettoyer got together. I was fortunate enough to get him. And we brought some people of influence in New York around a table, decided, yes, we could all do this. Everybody would put their weight behind it. They did. I got Sotheby's and Swan Auction House to put a brochure in their catalogs. The Wall Street Journal came out with an article that was entitled "In Stieglitz's Footsteps," and we started selling $3,000 and $9,000 books before we even made them.
Do I get to jump here? So I want to just share that amazing quote from the Wall Street Journal that came out with the journal in 1999. The quote is, "It was the most luxurious literary photography journal in the world." So it really hit the scene with an impact.
Right. So so that what brings to mind is, as anybody that knows camera work, it wasn't really a book that was a magazine that was made to last. Stieglitz wanted people to take the photographs out, they were photographers, and hang them up, because he was advocating photography as a fine art. And that's the one thing he had in mind. Of course, around that time too, papers were not plentiful, they were acidic, so the papers typically didn't last. But that's secondary, because his intention was to make sure that people hung these photographs and promoted them as fine art. So the way that we started was really a combination between what Stieglitz was doing and the fine art book platform. That's what we really wanted to go after. We wanted to create the books as art as much as anything that was in it, whether it was the literature or the photography. Anyway, so in 1998 it started. I didn't have any money, so I started in my garage and, started with John on the phone, and we just went back and forth, and we got people together, and we were able to produce the first volume after I mortgaged my house, because I I looked in the photography market. I knew a lot of the dealers. I lobbied them. I asked for some money. Most people said, you won't last a year, which even motivated me more. So then I went to my wife and asked her if we could mortgage the house. She said, well, why not? So, and we were off to the races from there. We then created 6 journals and started to transition after our 3rd or 4th journal into the idea of doing monographs, putting much more energy and much more make into the book so that we could start to really enter the fine press book market in a way that integrated literature, photography, bookbinding. And it's always been a struggle for me to, to present our work as an American art, which is really what it is. It's not just a photography book. And it's not a photography. It's a book about design and production and collaborative experience between at least a dozen people. So it developed into that. And it seems like every year we bettered ourselves. We created more interesting books, more interesting combinations. And that's pretty much, how it started. And the trajectory just kept going up from there. The risk never got any lesser. Acquisition costs for customers was very difficult. But I'll tell you what drove this business. It was passion. And it was the belief in what we did. Crissy and Pam would spend, they would be, I don't know how many thousands of miles they put on, whether it was London or, San Francisco or any number of cities in the country. But we had to show these books. We had to show them.
So, Stephen, when did Pam come on the scene? Pam, maybe talk about how you came into 21st Editions and
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm the only one on the panel that has absolutely no background in books other than I knew how to read them. So I met Janet, his wife, when she was working at a mental health substance abuse clinic. I was the administrative officer of 3 clinics. And as much as those clinics do a really wonderful job, and thank God that they're there, after a while, nobody comes in there happy. They're all sad. And, for me, it was just, I couldn't do it anymore. And I mentioned to Janet, it's like, I got to get out of here. And she's like, well, hold on a second. My husband's, his assistant at the time was only part-time. He needed somebody full-time because the company had started to grow. And so I went and I interviewed with him, and I told him that if you're going to hire me, you're going to have to let me know how all of the different pieces work. How do sales work? How do production work? How does administration work? So that when you ask me for something, I don't want to have to do it twice. I want to know already how you're going to use it so that I can give it to you the first time. So that was like a stupid statement because
I didn't know. I had no idea what I was doing.
And then different hats came on. I started selling, and I ran the office, and pretty soon we were doing 5 books a year in different stages, and it was getting craziness. And so, Steve, you just need to do what you do best. Run the company, let us, do the other parts. And so I was able to go out with him several times with the people with the production, and I caught on to it and I really liked it. And so he gave me the job of being the liaison between the production people and him. So what would happen is we would decide on a photographer, we would then decide on the literary work, and then would be given to me to take to production and try and figure out how we were going to put that all together in a beautiful package that you start from the beginning and it's a little journey as you go through. And there we are.
Crissy, you got a long history with 21st Editions, about 20 years as well. Let us know how you came on the scene.
It's broken. Can I borrow yours? Or it's operator error. It's probably operator error. So yes, I have been working with Steve about 20 years, as Deborah mentioned. I went to Rochester, New York, the home of photography, with a sparkly new photography degree, thinking I was only going to stay there a year or two. I'm still there. I knew people at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. I went over there and just asked if they had a job binder. I was not necessarily a student. They didn't ask me. So I went and looked at their job binder, and a former employee of Steve's had a small little ad that I answered. So I worked as a personal assistant for a while, similar to Pam. I was just kind of looking for how I could help and what more I could do. I ended up learning how to do web design so I could take over designing the 21st website. I continued taking classes with the Bixlers who set all of our metal type at the time. And I knew all along that I wanted to be the book designer, but I needed to do a lot of things in order to get what I wanted. I had 3 jobs or something at the time when I started. And eventually I just kind of took on more and more with 21st, started designing all of the ephemera. So the brochures and whatnot that you'll see in the exhibition, most are my designs, multiple catalogs that we put together. And then Steve finally let me design a book, which I knew I would do. I just didn't know when it would happen. And it was luckily a book of the work of Masao Yamamoto, who was somebody that I long time had admired and wanted Steve to publish. So it was quite a very exciting journey, but I came to it with a family background. My great-grandfather was a bookbinder. My grandfather was a product designer for Quaker Oats and did a lot of iconic designs. So he was by far my greatest teacher. He knew typography inside and out and always was my mentor with his red pen. And my grandma would get so mad at him for correcting me, but he was honest and he taught me so much. So that about sums it up. And here we are today.
How many books did you work on, Crissy?
More than half the collection.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
26, I think we figured out at least. I don't recall. There's been so many. And I also, even books that I didn't necessarily design, like the Joel Peter Witkin journal, I scanned each page of the journal, which was a really interesting experience to read those words and have so much time with them.
Yeah, every project was like a new trip.
Yeah.
Nothing ever repeated itself. The challenges were always entirely different, which made it exciting. But part of my success, a big part of my success, was listening to Pam. Leave me alone. Let me do what I do best. And I segued that into everybody I worked with. You know, the binders. If you give people a job, you give them some guidelines, and then leave them alone, you'll generally get the best product from them.
Yeah, so I'm the boss now. John, your story with 21st Editions begins with your being a student of John Wood.
Yeah. I hate using a mic because I talk loud. So if I hurt your eardrums, I apologize. So I was not a photographer. I went to graduate school for creative writing and English. And I was almost quit that. I was in fiction, and then John Wood convinced me to write a few poems, and he'd look at them and decide if he'd accept me into the program, which he did. And I would go to his house and he'd look at my poetry. And John Wood had his walls in his study were just covered with all these 19th century photographs. And I knew nothing about them. So sitting with John, I started learning about them. I started reading about it. Then I took a photography class, an undergraduate photography class when I was in graduate school. And then I just started teaching myself a bunch of 19th century processes. And after that, eventually I went to graduate school for photography. But in the meantime, I became friends with John Wood and his family, and they took me to Santa Fe with them. And we went to John Stevenson Gallery, which was the Platinum Gallery. And John talked his way, introducing, because he didn't know John Stevenson. So he told me, John, John Stevenson is opening a gallery in New York. He goes, I'm going to have him come over here and talk to you. You just stand there and act bored like you always do. I was like, okay. So I did. And then John asked me to send him some slides. John Stevenson did. So I sent John Stevenson a group of slides, and he called me back and said he wanted me to be his first show in New York. And that's when I met Steve, and John Wood came to New York with me, and I met a bunch of other people. And that's when you guys were first talking about the first journal.
Yeah.
And I had some work in the first journal,
Yeah.
because of that, because of meeting Steve. And then from there, I think I wrote something, Karnakin's article in another journal. And then I had some work in the Strange Genius journal. Yeah, that's a great one. And then eventually I had they asked me to do a monograph. So I had a book of my own with my work in it. And I did finish my creative writing degree in poetry. So basically we took my master's thesis, which was a collection of poems, and that became the poetry. My photographs became the photographs in Blood Migration, and John Wood wrote the introduction. And that's how that's how that happened. So.
All right, there we have the lay of the land a little bit. I'd like each of you to share a behind the scenes experience that we'd never know about if we hadn't been talking to you. I think I'd like to start with Pam. And Stephen, you're last.
Thank you.
Because I know you all have many stories to tell.
Okay, so out of the 63 books, there are 63 different stories, and there's a hiccup probably in every one. And there are typos in most that were brought to our attention sometimes after we've already done them. There's all kinds of things that happen within the production. You start here, and then all of a sudden things change or whatever, Steve didn't like it, or we couldn't get material, whatever. So we were doing this one project with a gentleman by the name of Charles Grogg. He's a teacher out in Ojai, California. And he did platinum prints, solar exposed in his driveway. And he did them on a really beautiful Japanese Toronoko Gampi paper. There was only one paper maker in the entire world that did this. And he died in the middle of our project. And we were like, oh no. So we scrambled everywhere around the world, bought every single piece of the Gampi Toronoko paper that we could find, because this is what he printed all his photographs on. And then this is what we were having, in the book. We had to have them. Otherwise we'd have to start the whole project all over again. So let me tell you, that was a bit of a mess. But I could tell you a story about every single one of the books. There's a disaster story behind every one where we're like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. But that's the fun of it, I guess. That was the fun.
So my stories are actually printed in the books, but really very few people read the colophon. So I'm going to go ahead and beyond the colophon, which is where my stories lie. But with every book, there is a story around the typography, whether it being going to the Bixler studio where we printed the Charles Grogg book and meeting their pet duck and a little swarm of dogs around your feet while you're printing, to one of the books that's on display, Blue, the typeface I found was actually designed by a former instrument maker. And this is a book all about handmade guitars and the musicians around them. With the Sally Mann book, the typeface is Deep Dean, which is inspired by the place where it was designed. Her work doesn't exist without the South, without her place. So that's where my stories live. So I would like to just encourage those to go past the colophon, read the notes on the type, and really understand that with each book, there was all the decisions were very thoughtful and careful. And the best part is when you don't notice the type at all. That means I did my job. So I want you to notice it, but not too much, because then it's not done well.
I just want to mention that in some of the faculty in the art department come in with their students just to look at the colophon.
That makes us so happy.
I thought that might make you happy.
It does. And overjoyed. Thank you.
And I want to correct you. The book that's on display is Deep Roots, not Blue.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Same
Yeah,
artist.
it's just, I don't want somebody
Yes.
looking for blue when it's not there.
Correct.
Although on the side of the gallery, so it's an intimate gallery, it's intimate space, and the books are alongside the archives alongside the books. In a separate room, in our seminar room, I have two assistants who are with a selection of other books that you can also look at. So you can kind of get up close and get a little bit more of a glimpse of the rest of the collection.
And they can look at them?
Say it again?
Can they look at them?
Yeah, of
Good.
course. Yeah, it's the study collection.
Good,
We're going to put it to work.
great,
Yeah.
great. Yes,
All
good.
right, John, let's hear your story.
So mine is with when we did Blood Migration. There's a lot of work that goes into the planning of the book, obviously. There's designers working on it. And so it takes a while. So when they say, oh, yeah, we're going to do this book, the designers started working on it. And then, everything was finalized. But during that time, I had gotten a full-time job at City Colleges of Chicago in the English department. So I was working on tenure. And then when I finally got tenure, the art department asked me to come and teach in the art department. So I did. So I was going to have access to a darkroom when the printing started, because we still do teach film photography, and we've got extensive darkrooms there. So in that time, the design and everything was finalized. They knew what paper they were going to use. I knew what I was going to be printing on. And right at that time, they asked me to be an associate dean, which took me away from my darkroom. So I had no darkroom to work in really anymore. So I didn't have time anymore because I was working. It's 9 to 5, but it's more than 9 to 5 when you're in administration. And it's a lot of headache. So I had to build a darkroom. I had a 2-bedroom condo, and I had a plumber friend of mine come over and tear my wall up and put a sink in the extra bathroom or the extra bedroom. And it was a great darkroom. My neighbors kept questioning, why is there water always running? Why do we hear water running? So that was kind of a challenge, finding the time and building a new darkroom.
I didn't know those details.
Yeah, it was a pain. And I had to print a lot.
Well, it's important to note that we had a full-time platinum printer, but John was printing his own prints, and not just in, as platinum prints, but he was printing palladium prints, calotypes, and cyanotypes, and they were this big. They were 15 by 21, and it was all on cotton rag paper. So each print is hand coded and contact printed. And he had made hundreds of prints had to be made for the edition.
And I think the worst part was signing them. Just
I know,
because it was giving me
about that.
cramps. Yeah, and where to sign it and how big to sign it. And
Right.
And when you're signing something over and over and putting the title on something over and over, at least with me, I tend to daydream and sometimes misspell something. And I was like, Steve is going to kill me. So I had to figure out a way to erase something lightly so I could correct my mistakes. But yeah, so yeah.
You're the only photographer that ever titled their prints too, at my request.
Oh,
but because your work is so conceptual, it is so conceptual. It's the only time I ever felt like a photograph needed a title, because typically I don't think photographs should have titles at all, because then it leaves your imagination, leaves nothing to your imagination. Yeah, that was great. What a great, my favorite book, by the way, of my entire career was John's book, because it was all him. It was his poetry. It was autobiographical, it goes back to his family. It was his printing. and because I'm not a poet and I don't read a lot of poetry. That's where John Wood came in part. But John's just really was accessible to me. The poetry was accessible. I loved every aspect of the book. 5 years it took because he was taking other jobs. 5 years is a long time to produce a book.
Well, and your story?
Oh, my story. Geez, I was trying to think of something upbeat to bring to it. But it's an interesting story because it tells you, what's behind the trials and tribulations of business like this, which I probably wouldn't do today. So we did a book with an artist, a Latvian Jew named Misha Gordon, who I just adored. And we adored his work. And oftentimes I didn't know the artist until we decided to actually be involved with them. So we were very fortunate to work with artists that we mostly really loved. Anyway, so we had been, I don't know how long, probably a year we were working on this project. Everything had been set in type, printed on Hahnemühle German paper. The photographs were made by Misha. Any book that we incorporated silver prints with were always made by the artist. So I had Misha come to Western Massachusetts, spend 3 days with me signing the mounts, right? Typically the photographs are signed, but in this case, photographs were going to be attached later and we couldn't take 66 books. It was a 2-volume set. So he signed everything. We spent 3 days drinking vodka and signing all the mounts because he was Russian and he loved to drink vodka. So I don't know how long it was afterwards, but everything got sewn. So we're pretty far in the process. Things are about ready to be cased in. And Peter calls me, Peter Garrity, who's the binder. He goes, are you sitting down? I'm like, what do you mean, am I sitting down? He goes, well, I got some news for you. I don't know what's going on. He said, but I held a sheet of the paper up to the light and there was some yellow streaks in it. It was ever so subtle, but it was potentially a problem. And this was cotton paper. This was, machine-made cotton paper, 100% cotton. So I was pretty nervous about this. So we brought in a chemist from the company, Hahnemühle. We brought our own chemist in. We met for weeks on weeks trying to figure out what was going on. We figured, okay, well, we can hire, we can rent a large, space in a mill and lay all the pages out and nuke them to make sure that everything's clean with ultraviolet light. I'm like, oh, that doesn't seem really plausible. Or I'm thinking to myself, or we're going to have to just start over again. At this point, I get tens of thousands of dollars into the project, but I couldn't. So I sat on this for a long time, weeks, and I decided to start over again. We had to throw everything out because if I had cased those in and sold them, I mean, these were $12,000 sets, and I sold them and the paper started to turn, what am I going to do? It ruined my reputation, even though it wasn't my fault. So we started over again. But that just exemplifies the commitment that we had to doing it as right as we could. But there's always a mistake in every book. Remember that. You never know where it is, and sometimes you never find it, but it's there.
So I guess it's okay. I spelled John's name wrong in the postcard.
What?
Yeah. Can you believe it?
It's okay.
I'm sorry. Say it again.
I got back at you. I ruined your video.
Yeah. Okay. So there's one more story, which I think because we're showing the book downstairs, Love, you have the story about Neil Young, and I bet everybody would appreciate. That's kind of a fun one. No? No. Okay, we don't have to go there.
Well, no, it's a good story. It's a good story. I had, we were producing this book with Graham Nash, And these are Graham Nash's handwritten lyrics. We find them on the back of napkins, the back of paperback books, hotel stationery. When Graham was 50, his road manager delivered a box to him for his birthday, and it was all of all these lyrics that he picked up and saved for him. In any event, I asked Graham if we could use those to produce this book with his photographs of the time and of the people that he was close to and that exemplified, some of the lyrics. So he said he was great to work with. He was always saying yes. But we worked on that book for 5 years, and we were pretty much done with the content. And I needed somebody to write an introduction, and I asked him, maybe you could ask, Joni Mitchell to write the introduction. And he did. And I don't think she got back to us at all. So then I asked him, I said, well, since, David Crosby and Stephen Stills are, willing to sign the book because they're visually a part of it. And I said, could you think, you think Neil would write the introduction? I mean, that would be the logical thing. So he said, well, I'll ask. So I don't know, maybe 6 weeks later, he sends me an email. He says, well, I did ask Neil, and here's how he responded. Well, Neil was in, where was he?
Switzerland.
He was in Switzerland. And he wrote him an email. He didn't say anything, but it was just the introduction. So I said, okay, that's terrific. So we had the introduction, and then I asked Graham if he would, be willing to ask Neil to sign it because, I have all 4 signatures in the book. Well, he did say yes. And then when Willie, his son, went up to Northern California to have the pages signed, Neil wasn't quite clear on what these were. So he stuck around for a couple of days and finally got them signed. And Willie calls me on like a Tuesday night from my office. I'm leaving the office. He says, I got them signed. And I'm like, oh, because it was the last thing we needed. But then we had to get them back. So I said, where are they? He said, I left them with Neil. And I'm like, well, he left them with Neil to ship to me because there was a label in there. But the label was an old account of ours because the label had been created like months ago. So apparently they were shipped, but we never got them. So I'm like sweating it. I don't know what happened, but they finally arrived like 3 weeks later. I just don't know. And so it was an example of how we sweated every time some aspect of the work. And, now is a very different time because now we have some moments to sit back and appreciate what we did over 20 years. When we were doing it, it was like, oh, we're on to the next one. Oh, we got this one. We're still working on this. Oh. And then we go out and sell it. And then we come back and, we're still working on, the next productions. And I personally did. I don't know about you guys, but I never really had a chance to take it in and appreciate all that we had accomplished. But thanks to Deborah, now we have a great repository, and Deborah's, incredible work to, make this known and accessible to people. So we hope to inspire other people to do, things of their own that might be similar or just some kind of a, tangential, example of what we do or whatever. And I think that's happened. So we're really happy to be here. Thank you, Deborah, for your incredible vision.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of fun. It took a few years to work the acquisition out. And I had called Steve in 2016 or 2015? 2015. So I don't usually call publishers or vendors or anything like that. They usually come to me, okay? Um, but I had had my eye sort of on the collection, but it was, pricey. And more and more the art department I noticed was doing landscape photography. There was a lot of discussion in the art history department about landscape. And I had noticed the Southern Landscape book, and I sat on it for years. I was like, I should buy it, but it was expensive. And then I was like, oh, I don't know.
Sally.
This Sally Mann and Southern Landscapes by Sally Mann. And this email popped out from 21st Editions, and it said, this is our last copy of Southern Landscapes. So I just like picked up the phone. That was it. I picked up the phone, and Stephen answered the phone. Apparently you don't answer the phone a whole lot, but that day you did. And I was like, hi, I'm calling from the University of Minnesota. I'm really interested in your last copy of Southern Landscape. And what did you say?
I said, I'm so sorry, just sold it to Stanford.
And
But
then,
she was very compelling. She made a great case because Deborah knew exactly how she wanted to use it. And that really compelled me because from the beginning, our mandate was to make sure these books were in universities and schools and could be utilized in access, because most people can't afford them, including myself. The only reason I own them is because I made them. And I was really compelled. So I said, you know what, let me see what I can do. Because I had in the back of my mind, I had one in my own
I
collection.
think you told me it was on reserve. And
With Stanford, it was, yeah.
it was on reserve. And I said, well, they can't have it. I have to have it.
Okay.
Because I've been thinking about this for years, and you said, okay, I'll look into this.
Well, but and how you wanted to use it then really.
We had,
Discussion about that.
I remember I was in my office late that evening. We had a long conversation, and you quizzed me. You wanted to know, like, why do you want this so bad? What is so interesting about this book to you? And why is it important to the university? And I answered those questions. We had a great conversation. It was really fun.
Well,
And then he said, well, you should just come out and see the whole collection. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, where are you? And he said, Cape Cod. And I was like, sure, I'll be there. No problem. No, it just so happened that I was heading out to Boston that summer for a conference. And so it was just amazing timing. And so I said, oh, well, I'm going to be in Boston. And so we made arrangements, and I went out to the studio in Brewster and walked through, and you had all the books on display. And
we had the whole collection out.
I almost fainted.
Yeah, she had to leave an hour and a half
What was
earlier
that?
because she was so overwhelmed.
It was amazing. Okay, so you'll see there are 8 books on display here. Yuri Long, the curator at National Gallery of Art, how many books did they have on
12.
display? They had 12 books on, so there are 64 books. So we barely got half the collection out into the cases, but hopefully we'll do another version of an exhibit. But we tried to split up the books. So he showed some books over there, and I'm showing some books here. Of course, Southern Landscapes is in there. Blood Migration is in there.
And one of the attractions for Deborah, and I knew it would be because that's why I started to quiz you more, because I knew I had like 100 proofs of platinum prints, and all these had notes on them from Sally. I'm like,
Oh,
this
yeah.
is going to be really interesting to her because she can teach from this, right? So I think you bought the book before you came out, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I gave her 10 prints from the archive with the book so that she could utilize them in teaching. And
Yeah, so that was kind of the start. So I bought the one book, and he put in some of the correspondence with Sally Mann, and those are on display downstairs. And so that's what got this started here, that relationship built into our eventually buying the whole collection with a special endowment from the university. So we're very lucky to have that support
thank
for
you
the
very
art
much.
collection.
did you make your mind up when you walked in, when you walked out, or did it take time for you to decide, yes, I'm definitely going to go after this and get the whole thing?
Okay, so you're asking me when I left the studio, did
Yeah.
I know that I wanted the whole collection? I think I was too overwhelmed to be in a decision-making mode. I thought it was exquisite but I just needed to soak it in first. You were there. Scott was there. He remembers. It was,
It's a lot.
it's a lot. I mean, looking at all those books and the production for each book is so extraordinary that, I mean, I don't know. That's not a decision you necessarily make.
One of the most fortunate things that I'm grateful for is that I love Deborah and I love to work with her. And she's such a good person and she knows her shit. And I would say that it's a waste of time if we have the opportunity to work with people we love versus people we don't love to work with. That if we can ever have an opportunity, if we ever have an opportunity to say, okay, well, I can go here and work with this person and maybe the opportunity is great, but maybe the people aren't as great, and here maybe vice versa. That's what drove me, is working with people that I so respect and that can direct me, you know, if I'm not directing them. Because I don't know Crissy's job. I don't know Pam's job. I don't know Deborah's job. I only know how to bring people into my circle that know what I don't do. So thank you so much. Love
Yeah,
you.
thank you. Yeah. We don't want your job either.
No. Good. Okay.
I think we should open it up for some questions. Yes, Scott.
Those tales of what you were just talking about, what you said earlier about delegating.
Yeah.
To create these beautiful pieces of work, you got to assemble an incredible array of skill sets.
Yeah.
And it tends to have, you know, some strong personalities behind it.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you got any interesting stories about somebody who came in and kind of shook up the concept a little bit, and there was a little bit of.
Oh, yeah. John
So
Wood.
will you repeat the question, please?
Yes, so the question was around the relationship issue. You know, was there anybody that I interacted with that shook things up in a way that I wasn't prepared for, or that may have otherwise rocked the boat, sank the boat, right?
Not that negative, more about just a creative jolt from one of the skill sets that sort of that maybe you took it in a slightly different tack than.
Oh.
Can you
A
repeat
different,
the
a
question?
different tact other than what I was conceptualizing myself, or
Ideas or.
oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's a great question. It's a very different question than how I interpret it, so excuse me.
Stephen, repeat the question because we have Zoom people that can't hear it.
Would people come in that I would interact with that would have ideas that would turn the project in a different direction? Is that right, Scott? Yeah.
Turn, but it's kind of.
Oh, yeah, it happened all the time, all the time. You're looking at them. That's because I was willing to delegate and step back. But I always, not only did I ask people to challenge me, but I also asked people to be accountable because I did the same thing. But they did challenge me, both in many aspects, but especially including how we were going to go about doing a project. You know, if I had an idea, there was no apprehension, right, for you or Pam to say, you know what, I think it would be better this way.
Right.
So that happened all the time. In fact, because
So I'll expand on that just a little bit. So one of the things that people I think don't understand is that we don't do these books for the artists. So the artists are only one part of the whole production. There's photography, there's the writer, there's the paper maker, there's the binder, there's the designer. There's a minimum of 8 people, can go up to 14 or 15. So it's really hard for people to come. Everybody wanted to do a book with us. Oh, you know, I got this, I got that, you know, and first of all, whatever. So, but they would, they would think that they were going to be able, here's my writing, here's the design that I have. We're like, no, 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 that's just not what we do. We choose you. You don't choose us, we choose you. And because we have to be able to have complete control over what the project was going to be. It's like I would often say to people, I don't tell someone like John how to do his photography. God bless people, but they just don't have the ability, not the ability, they don't have the creativity to do all of it together to wrap it all up in a book.
Or
You know-
maybe it's the perspective.
Yeah.
It's almost like telling the artist to leave when you're going to hang a
Yeah,
show.
but here's
Right.
the exception, John. I mean, how was it for you? Because you not only had to interact with us from a production standpoint, you had to interact with John from, a perspective of the content and how it was being put together.
I'm easy. I mean, I'm not going to say anything about some of the other photographers you've worked with that I know. Yeah, it's, if there was something I didn't like, or I had to have conversations about what I was going to do and what I wasn't going to do, and if there was something I wasn't going to do, and I was convinced that, yes, I was going to do it, then, there's a lot of compromise that goes into those kinds of things. And you just have to be, and here's an example. I don't print the prints as small as they are in the book. Even though it's a big book, my prints are a lot bigger. So printing smaller prints for me is a little strange. They're like proofs that I would do just to look at, or, something that I was going to print larger. So there is that kind of compromise, I guess. If it were up to me, the entire page would have been covered with a print. But when you look at the book, it would have probably ruined the whole design of the book had my prints been as big as I wanted them to be.
Was there an interaction with John Wood around the poetry where you may have had a different idea than he did?
Yeah, there was some I just didn't want in there.
And what happened?
So I went in and I made the changes that I wanted to make in the poems themselves that John thought should be in there. There were reasons I didn't want them in there. So I said, okay, we can have them in there, but I want to make this change. I want to make that change, and I want to make this change. And that was easy for me because I had been working with John Wood for a long time in creative writing, in the creative writing program. So
That's unique.
So we have a few Zoom questions.
We do. So here's the first one. You mentioned that starting such an endeavor as 21st wouldn't be possible now. What is so different now that wasn't in the way before?
Enter technology. First of all, we don't typically do photography anymore. People aren't printing photography. They're making digigraphs. It's a very different animal. So when we were doing these books, if you went to B&H Photo in New York and looked for silver paper, you find a wall of 20 feet of silver paper stacked eight shelves high. The processes are receding into the background. The people that we worked with in bookbinding, while there are still bookbinders, it's not something people are flocking to. Not necessarily were they when we were doing it, but the processes of putting these books together and making them are becoming history. To do it today would be very difficult in another way because the market for this work is contracting. I'm not sure how we found it. It was by our passion and our belief and our ability to maybe convince other people, because we're the first ones that have ever done anything like this, combining photography and the book and the word. It was enormously risky when I didn't have a capital fund to draw from. Now I'm a lot older. I couldn't do it today at my age, and I probably wouldn't. But it mostly because of the peripheral circumstances that exists with technology and what people want. People aren't looking for tangible things anymore. Everybody's looking on their screens. It's a different world.
Thank you. And here's the next one. Can you share any thoughts on the craftsmen who helped manufacture the books, particularly the late Michael Bixler?
Can you repeat the question about, thank you.
Yeah, so can you share any thoughts on the craftsmen who helped manufacture the books, in particular, the late Michael Bixler?
Well, I can't mention Michael without his wife, Winnie. They were a very dynamic duo that started and met at RIT in Rochester, and they opened their letterpress foundry. They were extraordinary teachers in the craft. I don't know that anyone is doing what they did. Most people now, speaking of technology, have gone on to polymer plates, including 21st. And I want to kind of counter what Steve said a little bit in that I truly believe that digital design and typography has actually allowed more freedoms in what you can do in some of the book design. But the Bixlers really set the stage for me personally in a transition from monotype letterpress, lead type into having a respect for those letters and then moving it forward into digital technology. And they had wonderful little dogs and a pet duck and were nothing but giving about their time. And I believe that their work is in more places than we all even know, include, of course, myself. They've even printed, I think it was Harvard's degrees for a while. And they used to print letterpress that then would be photocopied and made into mass-produced books. So letterpress really started and lasted for a very long time, and it's different now, but it's important to remember that. So thank you for bringing them up, whoever did.
Speaking of the Bixlers, and I'm the least important in this whole effort. The most important people are the people who are actually creating these books, which typically get credited on the colophon page, but that's about the only time people are aware of them. So those are the people that need to be credited with 21st editions, Michael Bixler not being the least of them. Pam?
Yes, I just wanted to expand on that just a little bit because I had the opportunity when we got done printing and doing books. We pulled all of our production people together one day, and it was really great. It was the first time I think we were all together in one room. It was awesome. Some of them were meeting each other for the first time, even though they had collaborated on books with us over the years. But one of the things that really struck me about it was that they said that we were the only company that came to them and said, here's the photography, here's the writing, help put this together in a beautiful book. Whereas most times somebody will come to them and say, here's what I have, here's what I want you to do. So we were able to let them have their creativity shine through on our books, which was something that they thanked us for that day, because they said that they had never had that opportunity before in the past. So, I mean, seriously, like I said at the beginning, each book has a minimum of 8 people's hands, seriously, their hands involved in those books.
I know there's one more Zoom question and we're moving into the end of our time, but we can, if you want to stay just a few extra minutes, and then our reception downstairs starts. Oh, wait, we have until 5. Oh, relax. We're here until 5. Okay, bring on the questions. Yeah.
I answered the 2. I mean, I've already given the.
Oh, that's it. Okay, great.
Thank you. Thank you. For
Sorry about that.
Anybody in the room?
Another question? Well, it might be fun to talk about, and I know this is a tough question. It's kind of like saying, which is your favorite child? But can we talk about favorite books? Like, even if it's just your favorite book today, because I think that will help us get to know the collection a little bit, because none of us, maybe know it. Yeah, cool.
I mean, I'm with you, Deborah. Southern Landscape is among my top. I won't say absolute favorite, but just for myself personally, I have always admired her work, especially the landscape work. I love the freedom that I was allowed with the typography on that and a second color, which is very problematic. Thank you, Steve, for letting it in there. And, yes. And the registration is tricky. Like I had mentioned previously, that finding this typeface by a renowned typesetter and then have it be all about place. It just really, that is always the icing on the cake for me. I also want to bring up Adger Cohen's new book because it really, never have I had the opportunity to have so many pages to work with and so much space to give the viewer a break. So some of that book, there's just blank pages. You just see a black page and then you see another black page and that's it. And there's something, not a lot of designers are given the opportunity to have that kind of freedom. It's like, this is your page count and stick with it. So I want to bring that up too. And I think it's a more recent one. So often the newest ones are the favorites because they're more front of mind.
Right. And that was Adger's gift to us because this was not a book. We charged as much as it cost us to make, but that was because Adger gave us that luxury. And the black space, the black pages, to me, that's theater. You know, it's all about interpretation, and to have that space and the way Crissy designed it, it gave a stage to every photograph in the book, which there was nothing across the page from it. It's really a brilliant book.
And, you know, watching the students explore the collection, you sort of get what you're talking about because you can tell that they like drop into a whole nother world. And the room is so quiet when the students are looking at the books because they're captivated by the experience. It's not just the story. It's not just the images. It's not just the production. It's the whole experience. And it's pretty fabulous to watch the students have that interaction.
And one more note, that typeface is designed by one of the first known African-American typeface designers whose work is what was used for the Smithsonian's African-American Museum of History and Culture. So that's just, you know, those other little tidbits that make it just perfect.
Yeah, that gives you some insight into how we worked, you know, what we thought about, what was important to us, what we focused on.
And the books are performative, I think, like you had mentioned. You get lost in that space. And I think it's very important to respect the viewer and give them space to look through it at their own pace and have some breathing room. Because if you're just hit in the face with these beautiful images, boom, 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 you're going to be exhausted. You can't process them.
Yeah, perfect.
So my favorite is everyone. But the one I think I had the most fun with is Blue. The photographer is Timothy Duffy, and the photographs, he did tintypes, and the photographs are of American root musicians that have not been playing, actively, and Tim Duffy's foundation will help give them money for housing or food or medication, and also to get them back into the music world. And I loved that whole story about it. I loved the story about all the people, and the writings were from some of the musicians. I knew when I put it together that I wanted to have there be some respect to the people that were involved in this project. And so I got a chance to go out to Indiana to Twin Rocker Paper Company. It's the oldest handmade paper company in the United States, or North America, actually, continuous working. It's a blast. If you guys ever get a chance to make handmade paper, do it, because it is a blast. So anyway, I knew I wanted like a light blue hue to the paper. And so I said to Travis, okay, what are we going to do? Because, handmade paper, you don't just put a couple of drops of blue ink in there. It has to be something that is, cotton, that's going to have a color to it. So being in Indiana, he got some Indiana farmer blue jeans, cut them all up into very small little pieces, beat it all up. And the color, the handmade paper is all a really light hue blue. And then the binding, we wanted something that, again, that was going to be a nod to the South and the kind of people that we were highlighting. And so the binder and I came up with the idea of using an influence of the Gee's Ben quilt. This Gee's Ben quilt actually is done with blue jeans. And so what he did was he created this binding that is these sheets of paper that he then cuts them and then puts them together. So it almost looks like a quilt by the time it gets done. It's gorgeous. I happened to be in Alabama showing, or actually I was in Georgia at a show, and I was like, damn, I'm so close to Alabama. I got to go over. So I just, on a whim, got in the car, drove over to Boynton, which is where Gee's Bend is. And these women were sitting in the community room, and I went in, I explained what I had, what we had done. They gave me this big giant hug, and they were making a quilt, and I was telling the story about my family of having 10 people. We made quilt, blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, they said, oh, would you like to do a couple stitches? I'm like, yes. So it's those kind of experiences that we have with all of our books. So to me, I think that one's my favorite.
Everyone's got a story.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's really hard. I mean, I've always pointed to John's book as, my favorite book for reasons I mentioned earlier. The the fact that John was so involved with it, the poetry, which I love so much. I didn't mention this, but the paper, which was, it seems like a counter decision to what normally would happen, because it's a large book and normally you put a heavier paper in. But the paper was selected by the printer, Michael Russum, and it was a very light German Zirkel paper, very light. I mean, like almost too light, but it works because what it does is it forces you to interact with the book in a way that gives respect to the history that John is writing on, which is his family history. And I just really love it. I love the way it's designed, but at the same time, there are different over the course of 20 years. First, we did the journals. I could say what my favorite journal is, but it's a very kind of different effort. And then, there are the monographs, but for different reasons, certain books really stand out for me. Whether it's the literature, the binding, how it all came together, the experience itself, which I can't really share with people. They'll never know. So it's really personal, but it's hard to separate for me, Like Pam, I love everything about something that we've done. And so much of it has to do about the experience.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's what we're here for, is experience. We're experiencing life. And if we can't pull from the experience the most valuable things, well, then what is there left? Not just books.
One thing I do also want to add is here in Minneapolis, actually, was two of our most used production. Campbell Logan has book cloth that is like so many different hundreds of book cloth, and they have it in different colors, and they were right here. They almost, of the 63, I bet you that there's a Campbell Logan cloth on at least 75 to 80% of them. The other ones is Cave Paper, who is no longer here, but Cave Paper used to actually make handmade paper in a cave here in Minneapolis. And they would make John's book is covered with Cave Paper. And again, if you look at Steve's book is up there that also has Cave Paper. I bet you that there's at least 50% of our books have a touch of Cave Paper in it right here from Minneapolis at the time.
Speaking of Minneapolis, Cy DeCoste, who lives here and has been here for a good part of his life, I guess. One of our artists, who's 95 now, if you don't know about him, you should know about him. Cy DeCoste, just brilliant.
So the book Midnight Garden is on display downstairs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's exquisite.
And those platinum prints came from his studio because those guys were such great platinum printers, him and Keith Taylor. Keith did all his printing, just brilliant. I mean, imagine, you're coating a piece of paper with platinum palladium metals, right? And then you contact putting a negative to it, and it either works or it doesn't. If it doesn't, you have to throw it away. It's a very expensive process, but the beauty is it's just incredible.
Questions? Yeah.
So it sounds to me like what should be next is a book about making books. All the stories written down for everyone to.
Well, that's a great point. It's something I've been thinking about. I'm like, how do you write
Yeah.
the history? I'm like, well, maybe you just pull it from the correspondence. Maybe you chronologically print a chronological selection of correspondence between me and the artists and John Wood and the writers, and maybe you tell it that way. Leave the imagination open to people how to interpret it. Wouldn't that be cool? I thought that would be cool. That was something I just recently thought about. I'm not sure what the audience would be. I'm not sure very many people would be interested, but I think it would be just a great exercise in, later life experience.
Any other comments? Yeah.
Did you decide that it was important to have this collection in some library?
Oh, from the beginning.
Can you repeat the question, please?
It's capturing it in the middle, I think.
We do have a mic that will pick.
Oh, I have a
this
mic?
area
No,
Right here.
it's up
It's
on
right
the
here.
ceiling.
Oh, oh, okay.
Need some help.
Okay.
Herman, the question was, when did I decide I wanted to have the collection
Like here in the library. Or
in an institution? Yeah. Well, from the beginning. Because
Thank you.
Pam will tell you, Crissy, middle of the summer, we'd be carrying 4, 5, 6. I carried 9 cases of books at one point to the Boston Public Library, all dressed up, got to the Special Collections Library. I was completely wet. And we just showed the books to institutions first, and we never stopped. And during that period, Special Collections were actually buying, a fair amount of fine press books. I'm not sure if that's changed. I mean, you might know more than I would about that, but I think a lot of the funds are going towards curriculum that are, active and that teachers want to support. So maybe funds are no, it's different.
You're out of your league.
Okay.
Steve, I also,
Hey,
Steve, I wanted to add to that, with the journal, you also did the trade edition.
oh yeah.
Intended for libraries and institutions. It was a much more affordable, I don't know, $50 to $100, $200 version of the content of the books. With that in mind, maybe.
Yeah, we realized we couldn't forego accessibility to reference library shelves. So, and it was a journal, so we had to do that, which made it even more difficult because we had 3 different editions, which I would advise never to do.
Yeah, so I definitely spent a lot of time on the road with many variations of the journal
Hard.
and cases from institution to institution, library to library, making cold calls. That was a big part of it. And that was the number one motivating factor for a long time.
Yeah.
You had a question.
I think you spoke about how you've observed the students using the books. I'd like to know more about that. And also you and Steve had talked about how you knew you wanted the Sally Mann book because of the of how you and you how she wanted to use it. I'd like to know more about how.
Yeah, so the faculty will have different goals in mind for bringing the students over to the Special Collections Library. And like I said before, some of them come with a very specific task in mind. We're going to look at colophon. This is what a colophon is. This is, the finest way that it's done. And we're going to look at a specific book. Curator is one that gets pulled for that. But then other instructors will come in with the idea of we're going to look at bindings and look at the different ways that bindings are set, or look at the boxes, or look at the paper. or even just looking at the content. I mean, there's just so many different ways to approach them. And all of those are happening. Yeah. Thanks for the question. Mhm. Our photographer just showed up. I think that's really meta. Any other questions? About production, about book content, artists? Did we really run out of things to say? No. Come on, Pam, what do you got?
So I don't need a microphone. I could speak loud.
Do you have your microphone?
I come from a family of 10, so I don't really need a microphone. I guess I just would really like to just convey that every single book has a different story. Every single book, when we started here and we ended here, then that baby went to bed and we started with another one. And there's a lot of publishing companies that you can look at and you can say, that's this publishing company without even knowing what the content is or anything. Just by looking on the outside of the book, you know exactly where that's coming from, not us. And that was really important, was that each one of them was a separate entity upon itself, but at the same time, making sure that it was all together comprehensive as a collection. So you couldn't have one person over here wanting to use fabrics and material that somebody else had already done here, because then as a whole, because we always were looking forward to the future as to when somebody like Deborah was going to buy the whole thing. So that we wanted to be sure that each of them would look completely different. And so I just, when you're looking at the books, if you go downstairs, you're going to see that they're just not these small little babies. These are ginormous things. So when we tell you that we were schlepping these things around, it was not an easy task. So it's putting in institutions first with all of the sometimes non-ADA approved access at the time, was not an easy process, especially when we went to London when we had none of that. But anyway, when you look at them, please just look at them as an entire entity and know that they're individual little children amongst this big family.
Yeah, we call them performance art.
Yeah.
Interactive performance art. They really are.
Mhm.
And every book is a new business for us. It was a new business. It was like, oh, okay, we got to come up with another $100,000.
How many of you are familiar with the collection? Okay, that's great.
Oh, good.
Question?
Hey, Tom.
Tom Rose.
Hi, Tom.
I just want to give a shout out to, this isn't a question, to all of you. And I don't know if I spoke with anybody else on the phone. I think I spoke with several of you on the phone,
Yeah.
other than Stephen.
Yeah.
Given this particular project I was struggling with and fighting with and so on. But I can't tell you how helpful and how much I learned from you all, Stephen in particular. He was rigorous and as an editor, and to the point where it literally drove me crazy because I'm not a writer.
Yeah, you were very patient, though.
I've never heard that before.
So in many ways, it was like going back to being in a grammar school class. I'm a terrible speller. I'm somewhat dyslexic. And so it drove me crazy to get this thing done. But he was very patient along the way. And I think in so many ways, it resolved itself in a manifestation of something that I am incredibly proud of. And as it's about a posthumous collaboration with my brother, who is a photographer and mostly a painter, who had done these photographs in Mexico in 1960, 61. He traveled around the country taking photographs of the demise of the steam age. And he left really a remarkable legacy with his watercolors, but the photographs were never really
didn't really pay too much attention to the photographs that he took. He started on his journey about when he was, I think, about 15 in 1957. And in many ways, trying to figure out how to manage this was my struggle. But Stephen really helped me to frame a way to think about it. So I just wanted to say, as long as you're all here, thanks very much.
It was great to work with you on that project because you had so much passion. You believed, you so believed, I believed. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
So just, Tom is a faculty emeritus from the art department, in case you don't know.
Question? There was a question on the end here, Deborah. I didn't know if I saw a hand or, but.
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier that you couldn't do this today. And you answered the question as to why it isn't possible today. But if you were thinking about starting, what would you do that would be comparable?
If I thought about starting something new,
He's just ending, so it might be hard to start something.
Don't make him come up with any idea.
Would you go back to music?
yes.
Ah.
In fact, I intend to.
Yeah, we
as-
know you have a saxophone in your closet.
Play the guitar. But as an enterprise or just personally as my own personal ambitions.
However you.
Yeah, music. And I also wanted to support my wife. My wife is a very, very talented psychotherapist and does energy medicine as a new career. And she's finding incredible success.
Is she?
No, she's not, with all her patients. And she supported me for 25 years with this. So I want to support her now. And there's many ways I can support her, and I owe it to her. That's what I'm going to do. That's my main focus.
I just want to say, I would like to add that I think there are plenty of new ways to create beautiful books that you just maybe haven't thought of yet. I think that there are still beautiful materials and ways of binding and design opportunities that are further enhanced by technology. So although the aesthetic of 21st may be from another era, I want to be a little bit more positive in what is still possible with the art of the book. And what we're going to see in the future is very exciting. We just don't know what it is yet.
Yeah, I agree. That's great coming from you because you're still in it, and you're right. We should harness the technology and move forward. I mean, you did it, Tom, to some degree. Made a beautiful hybrid.
Isn't Worlds Apart kind of an example of moving into the 21st century?
It sure is.
So that's on display downstairs, and that's 360 digital photography.
Yep.
So that's an exciting move in the direction of the future. Yeah.
So I'm just curious, because to your point, I think you said the books are very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So would technology, would that possibly reduce the cost so it's more accessible to people like me?
I think it absolutely could. And I think you're seeing that with self-publishing among many artists these days and what you can produce. And now you can go online and produce a singular book, and it is very affordable. So I think depending on what your focus is, you might not be able to have a leather binding and a platinum print, but certainly the costs in many ways are going down, which can make it more accessible than it was in the past.
Tom, that it was more accessible in terms of being able to afford, because you did a hybrid.
With camping. And
Yeah.
done this particular project, and he had a lot of interesting suggestions. And so my work with Chip Schilling when he was here he always, he and I would get together in the same way that you guys are talking about. He would, sort of, I would come in with this, and this, and he would, sort of look at this and he would say, well, what if we did this? What if we did this? And for me, like that, it's like.
Yeah, I think that's the new frontier. I really do. I think it's the new technology. How do you utilize it? How far can your imagination go? I mean, I don't mean to demean it. I don't. It's just not where we come from. And we did integrate it into 3 or 4 projects. It wasn't my favorite, but that's just not where I come from. But now, the new generations, they should be utilizing it in a way that is as creative as possible. Yeah.
Well, you're still going to have that tension between the high production and low production. And it's not that low production is just starting now because of digital technology, but you go back to the Xerox machine, and that's when, zines really started to make a difference in culture. But that doesn't mean we still don't want that high fine press production. So it's really fun, to kind of address your question too. How are the students looking at these materials? I have a ton of classes that are coming to look at zines, which are, they're most of them are very low production kind of magazines, but they're called zines.
Yeah.
And then they look at them in contrast to something like the 21st editions, and it's a whole different experience.
Yeah. And it just because it's low production doesn't mean it can't have value. I mean, it can have value by virtue of conceptual value. Create something that nobody's ever seen before. Low production, that's got value in it. Just the fact that it's so unusual, right? It won't last for many decades, right? And they will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why they love them so much, because
Yeah.
you gain so much from just looking at this material, and it's so accessible.
Yeah,
And they can make them too.
yeah.
Right.
We have a bunch of ideas, but we're really just one idea. There's so many out there. Yeah. So I think you can do it. You can do a version of this with new platforms and new technologies. And actually, that's very exciting. Now, I don't have the skill base to venture into something like that. Maybe I would, because I could do it cheaper, but I could bring minds together. Don't worry.
Okay, be careful what you started, right? So we are at time. I want to thank.
Notice I felt that. I didn't even see her.
I'm cutting you off right here. Thank you, Stephen, Pam, Crissy, and John
great.
for joining us today. And thank you all for being here.